You're standing at the edge of a narrow dirt road somewhere in southern Italy. The air is warm. It smells like dry earth and rosemary. And right in front of you, perched on top of a jagged hill that looks like it was carved out by a giant hand, sits a city. Stone buildings, a church tower, rows of houses stacked on top of each other like they've been there forever. Streets so narrow, two people would have to turn sideways to pass each other. A piazza where you could almost picture old men playing cards and kids kicking a soccer ball. And it is completely, utterly empty. No lights in the windows, no smoke from the chimneys, no sound except the wind moving through broken door frames and the occasional crack of a loose shutter swinging in the breeze. This is Krakow, and it hasn't had a single full-time resident since 1963. Not because of war, not because of disease, not because the people who lived here were forced out by some government decree or some conqueror sweeping through. The city was abandoned because the ground beneath it, the very ground it had stood on for nearly 1,000 years, simply stopped cooperating. What you're about to hear is the story of Krakow, a place that was once alive with thousands of voices, full of arguments and laughter and heartbreak and Sunday dinners. A place that became one of the most hauntingly beautiful ghost towns on the entire planet. And a place that asks us a quietly uncomfortable question: what does it really take for a community to finally let go? To understand why Krakow was abandoned, you first have to understand why it was built in the first place. Because honestly, when you look at the location up on a steep, crumbling hilltop in the Basilicata region of southern Italy, your first reaction is probably, why here? Why on earth would anyone choose this spot? And the answer is the same answer you get for most ancient cities built in strange places: survival. Krakow's history goes back at least to the 8th century, though some historians believe there were settlements on that hill even earlier, possibly as far back as ancient Greek colonization of the Italian peninsula. The name itself likely comes from an old Greek word meaning rocky ground, which, if you've seen the place, tracks perfectly. But it was during the medieval period, roughly between the 10th and 13th centuries, that Krakow really developed into a proper town. In those days, the high ground was everything. Sitting up on a hill meant you could see enemies coming from miles away. You could defend the position. You had the high ground advantage that every military strategist, from Sun Tzu to your nephew who plays too much Call of Duty, will tell you is absolutely critical. And Krakow had the high ground. By the 1200s, it had a proper castle, a church, a bishop's residence. Records from 1276 put the population at around 2,500 people, which for a medieval hilltop settlement in the deep south of Italy was genuinely significant. This was not a tiny farming village. This was a real community with real infrastructure and real ambition. Over the following centuries, Krakow grew, shrank, got hit by earthquakes. This part of Italy sits on seismically active ground, survived invasions, changed hands between various ruling powers, and somehow kept going. The town produced priests and farmers and tradespeople and occasional troublemakers. It had festivals and feuds and a school and everything a functioning Italian town was supposed to have. But underneath all of that life, underneath the centuries of accumulated history and memory and routine, something was quietly happening to the hill itself. Here's the thing about the land in the Basilicata region of Italy. It looks solid, it looks ancient and permanent and fixed, but geologically speaking, it is anything but. The area sits on a type of soil and rock structure that engineers and geologists refer to as highly unstable badlands terrain. You might have heard the Italian word for it, calanchi. These are deeply eroded clay landscapes, gullies and ravines carved by centuries of rain and wind, and they look almost otherworldly, like someone took the surface of a barren planet and just dropped it into southern Italy. The hill that Krakow sits on is composed largely of clay and soft rock, and clay, when it gets wet, does not stay put. Clay moves. Clay shifts. Clay, under the right or wrong conditions, decides it would like to be somewhere slightly lower than where it currently is. For centuries, the people of Krakow probably noticed signs of this. Cracks in the walls of buildings, slight tilts in towers, and door frames. But it was gradual enough, and life was hard enough in other ways, that people adapted and continued. Then came the 20th century and a whole new set of pressures. After World War II, the Italian government invested heavily in modernizing the country's road and agricultural infrastructure, including in the rural south. New roads were cut through hillsides. Agricultural techniques changed. Water usage shifted. And in Krakow, a new water pipe system was installed. A sewer system that, while well-intentioned, ended up pumping water directly into the already unstable ground beneath the town. The hill started moving, slowly at first. Buildings shifted. Streets cracked. The church, which had stood for hundreds of years, showed new and alarming fractures. Engineers were called in. Investigations were done. And the conclusion was, to put it plainly, not good. The ground was not going to stop moving, and the town on top of it was not going to survive indefinitely. The beginning of the end, for Krakow as a living town, is usually dated to 1959. That year, geological surveys confirmed what many residents had feared. The hill was actively subsiding, meaning slowly sinking and shifting in a way that made large portions of the town structurally dangerous. Buildings that looked fine from the outside were sitting on ground that was effectively moving out from under them. The Italian government began a process of relocating residents down to the valley below, to a newer settlement that came to be called Krakow Peschiera. It was safer, it had flat ground, it had modern utilities and better roads, and the kinds of conveniences that people in mid-28th century Italy were increasingly expecting from everyday life. But leaving is never simple. Not when you're talking about a place where your family has lived for 20 or 30 generations. Not when the view from your front door has been the same rolling landscape your great-great-grandmother looked out at. Not when every corner of every alley holds some story, some memory, some piece of who you are. Many residents were reluctant. Some flatly refused to go. They patched their walls, propped up their floors, and stayed. Then came 1963. A major landslide tore through the lower sections of the town. Buildings collapsed. Infrastructure was destroyed. Nobody died in the event, which by some measure was lucky. But the damage was severe enough that authorities ordered a mandatory evacuation of the remaining population. Around 1,800 people were told to pack what they could carry and leave. And they did. They walked out of Krakow, down the hill, into the valley, into a life that was safer and flatter and louder with traffic instead of wind. A life where the floors didn't tilt and the walls didn't crack, and you didn't have to wonder every time it rained hard whether the ground was about to move again. Most of them never came back. Not to stay. Anyway, if you visit Krakow today, which you can do, on guided tours, with a hard hat and a signed waiver, you walk through streets that feel like time froze mid-afternoon on some ordinary Tuesday in 1963. There are still pots in some of the kitchens, still furniture in some of the rooms, warped and rotted now, but present, still faded photographs curling on walls. A child's shoe, found in one home during a documentary shoot, sitting in the middle of a room as if it had just been kicked off before bedtime. The Church of San Nicola still stands, though its interior is open to the sky in places where the roof has given way. The castle tower still rises above everything, still doing the job it was built 1,000 years ago to do, standing tall, commanding the view, watching over a town that no longer needs watching over. Trees and weeds have pushed up through cobblestones. Vines have climbed walls. Nature has slowly, steadily been doing what nature does, reclaiming the space, filling the silence, covering the evidence of human habitation in layers of green and brown and gray. It is, by any measure, one of the most visually striking places in Europe, which is part of why it's appeared in so many films. Mel Gibson used it as a filming location for The Passion of the Christ. James Bond's Quantum of Solace shot scenes there. Dozens of Italian films have used Craco as a backdrop, an already ruined city that doesn't need any set design to look post-apocalyptic. It already looks like the end of something, because it is. The descendants of Krako's last residents are still around. Many of them live in Krakow-Peschiera, just a few miles down the hill. Others moved to bigger Italian cities, or emigrated to the United States, to Argentina, to Australia, to wherever the post-war migration waves took Southern Italians looking for steadier ground and steadier work. And many of them carry Craco with them in the way that displaced people carry their origins, not as something they can touch, but as something that lives in the stories their grandparents told. There is actually a Craco Society, an organization founded by Italian Americans whose families trace back to the town, that works to preserve the memory and history of the place. They gather, they share photographs, they fund preservation efforts, they go back to visit, sometimes, and walk the guided tour routes and look at the walls their ancestors built. Because here is something interesting about abandoned places. They do not lose their meaning just because they lose their people. If anything, the emptiness amplifies something. When you walk through Craco, you are very aware of the lives that filled those spaces. The silence makes the imagined voices louder. Somehow, you think about the kid who lived in the room with the rotting bed frame. You think about the woman who carried water up those steep stairs every morning. You think about the old man who sat on that particular stone wall and looked out over the valley every evening. Those people are gone. But Craco holds their shape, the way a glove holds the shape of a hand that's no longer in it. Craco's story didn't end in 1963. It just changed. In 1980, a major earthquake struck the Basilicata region, the Irpinia earthquake, one of the most destructive in modern Italian history. It killed nearly 3,000 people across southern Italy and caused additional damage to the already crumbling structures of Craco. More walls came down, more of the hill shifted. Any remaining hope of ever repopulating the old town was essentially finished by that point, but what emerged in its place was something unexpected. Craco as a cultural artifact. Italian cultural heritage authorities began treating the site as something to be preserved rather than demolished. Conservation work has been done on several of the most structurally significant buildings, including the church tower and parts of the castle. The guided tour program was established to allow visitors in safely while keeping the most unstable areas cordoned off. UNESCO and various European preservation organizations have taken interest in sites like Craco. Italy alone has over 100 significant ghost towns. The result of this country's particular combination of seismic instability, economic migration, and the kind of terrain that looks beautiful in photographs and terrible on a structural engineering report. Some of these towns have been repopulated in a fashion artists, writers, remote workers, people who want to live somewhere genuinely different and don't mind the challenges that come with that. There are programs in Italy and in Spain, Portugal, and Greece that essentially give away old village properties for nominal amounts to anyone willing to actually live there and invest in restoration. Craco has not gone that route. The geological instability is simply too persistent, too ongoing to allow for full repopulation. The hill is still moving, slowly. The ground is still doing what it has been doing for centuries, just more visibly now that there are no people reinforcing the walls and patching the cracks. It is, in a sense, returning to what it was before the people came, just doing it very, very slowly. Craco is one story, but it's part of a pattern. Across southern Italy, across rural Spain and Portugal and Greece, across parts of Eastern Europe and Latin America, and the American Midwest, there are towns and villages that have been slowly, steadily emptied out, not by dramatic disasters, not by war or plague, but by the quieter, more relentless force of people doing the math on their own lives and deciding that the future they want is somewhere else. In Italy, this process has been going on for over a century. The mass migration of Southern Italians in the late 1800s and early 1900s to North America and South America took whole generations out of small towns. The post-war economic boom brought another wave, this time north to Milan, Turin, Rome. The promise of factory work, apartment buildings with running water, schools for the kids, a grocery store that isn't a 2-hour walk away. Against all of that, the romantic appeal of a medieval hilltop village, even a beautiful one, even one with 1,000 years of history, tends to lose the argument. People don't leave places they love because they stop loving them. They leave because the costs of staying become higher than they can afford to pay. Sometimes those costs are economic, sometimes they're physical, like a hillside that literally will not hold still. Sometimes they're social, a town whose young people keep leaving until one day the town is just old people and then just memories. Krakow was all three. The ground gave way, the economy gave way, and the people finally let go. There's a photograph taken in Krakow sometime in the 1950s, just a few years before the evacuation. It shows the main street, the Corso, as they called it, on what looks like a summer festival day. People are everywhere, women in their good dresses, men in pressed shirts, kids running. Someone is carrying a banner. Someone else looks like they're mid-argument. It's loud and full and messy and alive. And then you put that photograph next to what that same street looks like today. The cracked cobblestones, the empty windows, the weeds, and you feel something that's hard to name exactly. It's not quite sadness, and it's not quite awe. It's something in between. Something about how much can change, and how fast, and how permanent the aftermath turns out to be. Krakow will not be a living city again. That ship has sailed, and honestly, the hill has probably already taken its own opinion on the matter, but it remains. And there's something in that too. 1,000-year-old city on an unstable rock, surviving mostly because it's too interesting to let fall down completely. Tourists walk its silent streets with hard hats and smartphones, photographing doors that haven't been opened in 60 years. Italian Americans gather in New Jersey or Toronto or Buenos Aires and tell their kids about the town their grandparents came from, the one on the hill in Basilicata. The stone holds its shape even when the people are gone. The story keeps going even after the ending. That, maybe, is what Krakow is really about. Not the abandonment, but the fact that we keep coming back to it.